On a gray October morning in 1995, Harold James Nicholson sat in a small, climate-controlled room inside a secure facility operated by the Central Intelligence Agency and submitted to a polygraph examination. The test was routine. A periodic security update required of all CIA officers with access to sensitive compartmented information. Nicholson had been through the process before. He had spent the better part of 2 decades inside an institution that regarded the polygraph as one of its primary tools for detecting betrayal. He understood the mechanics of the test better than most people in the building. The examiner attached the sensors, calibrated the equipment, and began moving through the standard battery of questions. When the examiner reached questions about unauthorized contact with foreign intelligence services, the instruments recorded responses that the examiner noted as deceptive. Nicholson, the examiner observed in his written report, appeared to be attempting to manipulate the test by taking deep, controlled breaths on the control questions, a technique designed to flatten physiological responses and obscure the contrast between truthful and deceptive answers. When confronted about the breathing pattern, he stopped. The test continued. He failed it anyway. He would fail 3 polygraph examinations in total, administered in October and December of 1995. The questions he failed were specific. Are you hiding involvement with a foreign intelligence service? Have you had unauthorized contact with a foreign intelligence service? Since 1990, have you had contact with a foreign intelligence service that you are trying to hide from the CIA? The answers, as the instruments recorded them, and as events would eventually confirm, were all yes. What followed those failed polygraphs was one of the most intensive joint CIA-FBI counterintelligence investigations of the post-Cold War era. It would eventually produce an arrest, a guilty plea, a sentence of 23 years and 7 months, and a second chapter of espionage conducted from inside a federal prison that drew Nicholson's own son into the operation. It would expose a man who had spent more than 2 decades learning how to catch people exactly like himself, and who had concluded at some point in the early 1990s that he could do what Aldrich Ames had done, and do it better. If you follow the documented truth behind intelligence operations and the real human cost of espionage, subscribe and turn on notifications. These cases are researched and verified every week, and this one reaches further than almost any other. Harold James Nicholson was born on November 17, 1950, in Woodburn, Oregon, a small agricultural town approximately 30 miles south of Portland. His father was a career officer in the United States Air Force, and the family moved continuously throughout Harold's childhood as his father received new duty assignments. Harold attended Desert High School at Edwards Air Force Base in California for 3 years, then relocated with his family to Marin County, where he completed his senior year at Novato High School and graduated in 1969. The constant relocations shaped him in ways that would later seem, in retrospect, formative. Naturally shy by his own account, he found it difficult to build friendships because the friendships he built were perpetually interrupted by the next move. He learned out of necessity to adapt quickly to new environments, to read rooms and people with speed, and to make himself agreeable and useful to strangers. The same family circumstances that made his childhood socially difficult were quietly building the foundational skills of a clandestine officer. He enrolled at Oregon State University, where he met Laura Sue Cooper in a fencing class. They were an unlikely pair. She was countercultural in her leanings, skeptical of American foreign policy. He was enrolled in the Reserve Officers Training Corps and aimed squarely at following his father into military life. They married in June 1973, the same month he graduated and was commissioned as a second lieutenant in the United States Army. His Army service took the family through a sequence of postings: Fort Campbell, Kentucky, where he served with the 101st Airborne Division, the Screaming Eagles, rising to the rank of captain and company commander. He was subsequently posted to an Air Force Signals Intelligence Listening Station in Okinawa, Japan, and later served at Fort Ord in California, where he held responsibility for tactical intelligence matters. After leaving the Army in 1979, he worked briefly for Hallmark Cards in Kansas City, Kansas, a detour that lasted less than a year before he concluded it was not the life he wanted. He joined the CIA in October 1980 at the age of 29, entering the Directorate of Operations, the clandestine service responsible for recruiting foreign assets, running intelligence operations overseas, and, in the formal language of the intelligence community, stealing secrets from adversaries of the United States. His evaluations from the earliest years of his CIA career were consistently strong. He was regarded as a natural, perceptive, disciplined, capable of maintaining complex social performances across extended periods, and possessed of the patience that clandestine work demands. From 1982 to 1985, he was posted to Manila in the Philippines, where his work involved sustained direct contact with targeted Soviet officials. From 1985 to 1987, he served in Bangkok, Thailand. From 1987 to 1989, he was posted to Tokyo, Japan, continuing operational work against Soviet and Communist intelligence services across Asia. These postings constituted the formative professional period of his career, the years in which a CIA officer moves from trainee to practitioner, from someone learning tradecraft to someone executing it in the field against real targets with real consequences. By 1990, Nicholson had been assigned to Bucharest, Romania, as CIA Chief of Station. Romania had just emerged from the revolution that ended Nicolae Ceausescu's dictatorship in December 1989. The country was politically unstable, its intelligence services were in transition, and the CIA's presence there was both substantial and sensitive. As Chief of Station, Nicholson had oversight of all CIA operations in the country, access to the identities of officers working undercover, and a panoramic view of intelligence priorities across a region redefining itself in the wake of the Cold War's apparent conclusion. The United States ambassador to Romania, during the final months of Nicholson's tenure there, later said that he had not been keen on having Nicholson remain at the embassy, a warning that, if it reached CIA leadership, was not acted upon. In 1992, he was reassigned to Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, serving as Deputy Chief of Station and Operations Officer. His work there involved targeting Russian intelligence officers for recruitment, meeting with them, developing relationships, attempting to turn them into assets for the United States. It was here, according to the FBI's subsequent investigation, that the line was crossed. His personal life by this point was in serious strain. Over a 23-year period, the family had moved 21 times. Laura had grown increasingly embittered by the constant relocations and her husband's workaholic habits. He skipped family vacations, was frequently absent for days at a time, and prioritized his career at the expense of the domestic life she had been trying to build. In June 1992, around the time of his transfer to Malaysia, Laura took the couple's 3 children from Romania to her brother's home in Washington State and filed for divorce. A custody battle followed. Nicholson won temporary custody and took the children to Malaysia with him, but Laura contested the arrangement. The divorce was finalized in August 1994. A court-appointed guardian concluded that Laura's continued anger at her husband negatively affected the children, and Nicholson was awarded primary custody of all 3. Nathan, born in 1982, Jeremy, born in 1985, and Starr, born in 1989. The divorce created immediate and significant financial pressure. Under the settlement, Nicholson was required to pay $650 per month in alimony, assume travel costs for the children, and maintain a household on a government salary of approximately $73,000 per year, a salary that had previously been supplemented by the overseas lifestyle allowances that came with foreign postings, and that would no longer be. He returned to the United States in 1994 and was assigned to the CIA's training facility at Camp Peary, Virginia, known throughout the intelligence community as the Farm. His role was as a staff instructor in the Career Trainee program, teaching new CIA clandestine service officers the foundational mechanics of their profession: how to recruit assets, how to handle agents, how to conduct surveillance and counter-surveillance, how to use dead drops, how to maintain cover under pressure. He was, in the assessment of his supervisors, among the most experienced and capable instructors the program had produced. He was also, by the time he arrived at the Farm, already a spy for Russia. The FBI affidavit filed at Nicholson's first trial describes a pattern of contact between Nicholson and a Russian intelligence officer that began in Kuala Lumpur during the final months of his posting there. During that period, Nicholson met with an SVR officer on 4 documented occasions, 3 of them inside the Russian embassy in Kuala Lumpur. The meetings were authorized by the CIA and reported by Nicholson as part of his recruitment targeting work, standard procedure for a clandestine officer attempting to develop a foreign intelligence officer as an asset. What the CIA did not know was that at some point in that sequence, the relationship inverted. Nicholson was no longer the recruiter. He had become the recruited. On June 30th, 1994, one day after his last documented meeting with the SVR officer in Kuala Lumpur, a wire transfer of $12,000 arrived in Nicholson's savings account at Selco Credit Union in Eugene, Oregon. The FBI would later establish that this payment could not be traced to any legitimate source of income. It was the first of many. The financial pressure of his divorce, the alimony obligations, the abrupt end of overseas allowances, all of it converged at the precise moment he crossed into espionage. He later told investigators and the court that he had been inspired by the Aldrich Ames case rather than deterred by it. Ames had been arrested in February 1994 for selling CIA secrets to the Soviet Union and Russia, compromising networks that led to the execution of at least 10 individuals who had been working for the United States. Where others in the intelligence community saw the Ames arrest as a cautionary lesson, Nicholson apparently saw it as a proof of concept, and as an indication of what he would need to do differently to avoid the same outcome. By 1994, Nicholson was standing in front of classrooms at the Farm, teaching the next generation of CIA officers the same tradecraft he was now deploying in the service of Russian intelligence. His position as a staff instructor gave him access to something of extraordinary value: the true identities, biographical profiles, and planned overseas assignments of every CIA career trainee who passed through the program during his tenure. These were officers who would be deployed under cover identities to sensitive postings around the world. By providing their true identities to Russian intelligence, he was not merely compromising current operations, he was burning officers who had not yet begun their careers, preemptively eliminating their usefulness before they had taken a single operational step. According to court documents and official assessments, Nicholson sold the identities of CIA trainees from the classes of 1994, 1995, and 1996. He sold the identities of all United States intelligence officers stationed in Russia. He provided Russian intelligence with a summary of the Aldrich Ames debriefing, a document of extraordinary sensitivity that detailed what Ames had told American investigators about the full scope of his own penetration. He provided documents about Russian military preparedness and Russian intelligence capabilities. He provided information about Russian recruitment pitches made to CIA officers in the field. The financial compensation he received totaled approximately $300,000 over the course of his espionage activity, which ran from June 1994 until his arrest in November 1996. The money arrived through wire transfers in cash at meetings overseas and through various channels across multiple countries. In at least one instance, he mailed postcards to his SVR handlers from ordinary public mailboxes near his home, signing them under the alias Neville R. Strachey. An unremarkable name, written in ordinary ink, dropped into a street corner mailbox like a grocery list. To the neighbors who saw him coming and going from his house in Burke, Virginia, Nicholson was a single father managing a demanding career while raising 3 children. He attended school events when his schedule permitted and maintained the household routines, dinner, homework, weekend outings, that 3 children required. Star, the youngest, was in elementary school. Jeremy was approaching his teenage years. Nathan, the oldest, was in his early teens. None of them knew what their father was doing during the hours and trips that fell outside their view. In June of 1996, Nicholson traveled to Singapore on what he described to the CIA as personal leave. 2 known SVR intelligence officers from Moscow were in Singapore during the same period. Before meeting with them at a remote location, Nicholson employed counter-surveillance techniques, the same techniques he had been teaching his students at the farm. The contact was unauthorized. After returning from Singapore, he made several large cash transactions totaling approximately $20,000. In July of 1996, he was reassigned from the farm to CIA headquarters in Langley, Virginia. Branch Chief in the Counterterrorism Center, Directorate of Operations. The position carried a pay grade of GS-15. It also carried access to a new range of classified material, and Nicholson wasted no time exploiting it. CIA computer records from this period show him conducting searches using keywords including Russian and Chechnya, subjects for which he had no documented operational need in his new assignment, but which were of direct interest to his SVR handlers. In April of 1996, an SVR liaison officer had formally requested information from the FBI about Chechen terrorism. In the same month, Nicholson had gone to CIA headquarters and requested internal information about Chechnya, claiming it was for a training exercise. No such training exercise had been planned. With the polygraphs flagged and the investigation opened, the CIA's counter-espionage group, working in conjunction with the FBI's National Security Division, began assembling a case using a combination of financial surveillance, communications monitoring, physical surveillance, and the deployment of an inside source. A CIA officer named John McGuire had been working a desk job in human resources after a difficult period in the field, what the agency called being sent home. In 1996, he was recruited by the joint CIA-FBI counter-espionage team to serve as the inside man in the Nicholson investigation. McGuire had been told by the team, "We have another Ames, and we have to catch him." His background as a former Baltimore police officer and his experience testifying in court made him well-suited to gather evidence inside CIA headquarters in ways that would survive prosecutorial scrutiny. The investigation was methodical and comprehensive. Nicholson's financial records were examined. His travel history was reconstructed in detail. The hard drive of his personal notebook computer was searched under a court-authorized warrant executed in August of 1996. That search produced numerous classified CIA documents and fragments of documents related to Russia, files that had been deleted from program directories but not fully erased. Among the documents found were biographical and assignment information about CIA employees, records about Russian recruitment pitches to CIA officers in the field, information about the CIA station in Moscow, a summary of the Aldrich Ames debriefing, and extensive personal notes. A computer diskette found with the laptop contained 7 summary reports concerning CIA human assets, real people serving as sources for American intelligence, identified by code names and positions. A court-authorized search of Nicholson's office at CIA headquarters in November 1996 found him in possession of highly classified documents about Russian military preparedness and intelligence capabilities that had no connection to his counterterrorism assignment. Electronic surveillance of his office captured him photographing CIA documents after physically removing their classification markings. FBI surveillance also documented Nicholson mailing envelopes containing postcards from local public, mailboxes under the alias Neville R. Strachey. The postcards referenced his assignment at CIA headquarters and his planned personal travel to Switzerland in late November 1996, a trip that was, in fact, intended as a delivery run to his SVR handlers. That same month, Nicholson was scheduled to travel to Europe on official CIA business to meet with European intelligence officers. He told the CIA he planned to take a personal vacation to Zurich afterward. On November 16, 1996, the day before his 46th birthday, Harold James Nicholson arrived at Dulles International Airport. FBI agents who had been positioned in the terminal approached him as he prepared to board his flight to Zurich. He was carrying 10 rolls of exposed film and a computer disk bearing classified information from CIA files, information that included the identities of the CIA Moscow chief and his staff, the identities and code names of CIA informants, and the identities of CIA case officers. He had intended to deliver all of it to SVR handlers in Switzerland. The agents identified themselves, presented their credentials, and informed Nicholson that he was under arrest. His 3 children, Nathan, then 14, Jeremy, then 11, and Star, then 7, were at home in Burke, Virginia, unaware that the structure of their lives had just been permanently altered. The legal proceedings against Nicholson moved through the federal court system in the Eastern District of Virginia, with the efficiency for which that jurisdiction is known. He was held without bail, his access to classified material was terminated, and the damage assessment process began. The painstaking, necessarily incomplete effort to determine exactly what had been compromised, what operations had been burned, and which individuals might be at risk. The picture that emerged was severe. Prosecutors concluded that Nicholson had sold the identities of potentially hundreds of CIA trainees who had been his own students. Those officers faced the prospect of serving in overseas posts under cover identities that Russian intelligence had been given cause to investigate. Some were reassigned, some had their deployments restructured. In some cases, years of training and cover development were effectively eliminated before the officers involved had conducted a single operation. What the FBI and CIA stated publicly was direct. As a result of Nicholson's disclosures, it would be difficult, if not impossible, for some of those newly trained case officers to ever serve in certain sensitive foreign postings for the remainder of their careers. In March 1997, Harold Nicholson entered a guilty plea to one count of conspiracy to commit espionage. He acknowledged in court that he had intended the money he received from Russian intelligence to benefit his children. His cooperation was described by government officials as extensive, though intelligence officials would later note that questions about the full scope of his disclosures were never entirely resolved. The sentencing hearing was held on June 5, 1997, in Federal District Court in Alexandria, Virginia, before Judge James Nicholson. The government presented its damage assessment. The defense argued for leniency based on Nicholson's cooperation, his prior service, and the impact of a lengthy sentence on his 3 minor children. Judge Nicholson acknowledged the mitigating factors and sentenced Nicholson to 23 years and 7 months in federal prison. At the time, the longest sentence ever imposed on a CIA officer for espionage. Nicholson was transported to the Federal Correctional Institution in Sheridan, Oregon, a medium-security facility selected in part to keep him geographically accessible to his children, who were now living with their grandmother Dorothy and an aunt in Eugene. He had asked to be imprisoned near his family. The Bureau of Prisons had agreed. What no one in the federal government fully anticipated was what Nicholson would do with that proximity. The Nicholson children were, in the bluntest possible terms, collateral damage of a kind that no legal proceeding fully accounts for. Nathan, 14 at the time of his father's arrest, was old enough to read the news coverage and to understand, in broad outline, what his father had done. He encountered in school and in social settings the particular stigma that attaches to the families of convicted spies, a stigma that carries a dimension of political betrayal that makes it feel both more pointed and less sympathetic than most other categories of parental disgrace. Jeremy, at 11, had a more fragmentary understanding but felt the social consequences with equal force. Star, at 7, had almost none. Her memories of her father were the most immediate and the most unqualified, and the loss was therefore the most complete. The 3 children rebuilt their lives in Eugene, Oregon, in the care of their grandmother. Letters were written. Prison visits occurred. The paternal relationship continued, attenuated and reshaped by concrete walls and visiting room protocols, but not severed. Nathan Nicholson grew up idolizing his father. This is documented not as a psychological inference, but as a direct statement. Nathan said it himself to the Associated Press in 2010. He described Harold as the person he had admired most in the world. He visited regularly as he grew into adulthood, making the drive to Sheridan and sitting across from a man who, despite the prison uniform and the lost years, retained the full weight of a father's authority and a father's emotional hold. In the summer of 2006, Harold Nicholson asked his son for help. The request, as Nathan later described it in court proceedings, was framed as a matter of fairness. A pension, Harold called it, money that Russian intelligence owed him for work performed in the 1990s before his arrest. He needed someone to make contact on his behalf, to travel to meetings he could not attend, to collect what was owed. He passed Nathan instructions through prison visits and coded letters smuggled from the facility. He trained his son in exactly the tradecraft he had once taught at the farm: hide money in different locations, never deposit more than $500 at a time, pay for travel in cash, leave no paper trail. He praised his son's preparation. According to the sentencing memo filed by federal prosecutors, Harold told Nathan that he had performed as well as, or better than, some of the CIA employees he had trained for the agency. From 2006 to 2008, Nathan Nicholson, a former United States Army paratrooper by then in his mid-20s, met with representatives of the Russian Federation on 6 documented occasions. He met SVR representatives twice at the Russian consulate in San Francisco, then traveled internationally to Mexico City, Lima in Peru, and Nicosia in Cyprus. He collected money and received instructions. He carried information from his father and brought back payments. In Lima, he was given a password phrase by his Russian contact that he would use to identify himself at subsequent meetings. The final meeting took place on December 10th, 2008, at a TGY and Fridays restaurant in Nicosia, Cyprus, where Nathan collected $12,000 in cash from an SVR representative. Some of the money he brought back across international borders was transported in $100 bills tucked inside a PlayStation video game case. Nathan collected approximately $47,000 in total from Russian agents over the course of those 2 years. The FBI had known something was wrong long before the Cyprus meeting. In February 2002, a concerned citizen had informed the Bureau that Harold Nicholson appeared to be using fellow inmates to pass messages to Russian agents through their outside communications. An investigation was opened. A cellmate at Sheridan was interviewed and confirmed that Nicholson had spoken to him about concerns regarding information he had previously provided to Russian intelligence. The FBI monitored prison visits, mail, and communications for years before enough evidence had accumulated to support charges. Nathan Nicholson was arrested in November 2008 at the Eugene, Oregon airport upon his return from Cyprus. He was 26 years old and carrying approximately $9,500 in cash. When FBI Special Agent John Cooney informed him that lying to federal agents was a federal crime and offered him what Cooney would later describe in testimony as a mulligan, an opportunity to change his story, Nathan became, in the agent's words, more forthcoming. Harold Nicholson pleaded guilty on November 8, 2010, to conspiracy to act as an agent of the Russian government and conspiracy to commit money laundering. He was sentenced on January 18, 2011, to an additional 8 years in federal prison to be served consecutively with his original sentence. He was 60 years old. Following this second conviction, he was transferred from Sheridan to the United States Penitentiary Administrative Maximum Facility in Florence, Colorado, the federal supermax prison known as ADX Florence, reflecting the institutional assessment of his continued threat level. Nathan Nicholson appeared before United States District Judge Anna Brown on December 7, 2010. Prosecutors and defense attorneys presented a joint recommendation that Nathan had been manipulated and groomed by his father, that he had cooperated fully with the government once confronted, and that a non-custodial sentence was appropriate. Judge Brown agreed. She sentenced Nathan Nicholson to 5 years of probation and 100 hours of community service. He served no prison time. Outside the courthouse, Nathan told reporters that he had idolized his father, but that after this, he wanted to be his own man. He did not want to live in someone's shadow. He enrolled at Oregon State University, his grandfather's alma mater, studying computer science on veterans' benefits and financial aid. He said he wanted to restore the honor that had been lost. The CIA and FBI implemented significant procedural and security reforms in the years following Nicholson's first arrest, building on the changes already initiated after the Ames case. The chief of the CIA's counter-espionage group was designated as a senior FBI official with full access to the CIA's most sensitive counterintelligence data. Polygraph examinations were made more frequent, and their results treated with greater institutional seriousness. Financial monitoring of officers with clearances was enhanced. Protocols governing access to career trainee files were restructured. Section 811 of the fiscal year. 1995. Intelligence Authorization Act mandated immediate notification to the FBI whenever there were indications that classified information may have been disclosed without authorization to a foreign power. Whether these reforms are sufficient to prevent future penetrations of the kind Nicholson represented is a question that the necessarily secretive nature of the intelligence community makes impossible to assess from the outside. What can be stated with confidence is that Nicholson's case, like the Ames case before it and the Robert Hansen case that followed, demonstrated a persistent vulnerability in any intelligence organization. The officers entrusted with the most sensitive information are precisely the officers most capable of catastrophic damage when they choose betrayal. The measures designed to prevent that betrayal are developed by people operating inside the same institutional culture, and they reflect the same assumptions about human behavior that the traitors have already learned to exploit. Jeremy Nicholson was not charged with any crime. Neither was Starr. Court records and investigative documents contain no suggestion that either of them had any knowledge of Nathan's meetings with Russian intelligence or of Harold's continuing relationship with the SVR from inside prison. They were secondary victims of a man whose choices they had neither made nor endorsed, carrying consequences that were not legal but social and psychological. The particular weight of a name that returns specific and damaging results in any search, attached to 2 federal espionage convictions for the remainder of their lives. Dorothy Nicholson, Harold's mother, who took in her 3 grandchildren in 1997 and attended sentencing hearings and prison visits for more than a decade, died in the mid-2000s. She had lived long enough to see both her son and her grandson appear in federal court on espionage-related charges, and to watch her grandchildren build adult lives in the shadow of those proceedings. On November 24, 2023, 2 days ahead of his scheduled release date, Harold James Nicholson walked out of federal custody. He was 73 years old. He had served a combined sentence that reflected 2 separate betrayals of the country whose secrets he had spent 21 years being trusted to protect. The Cold War that had structured his entire professional formation was a historical artifact. The CIA officers whose identities he had sold had aged, retired, and in some cases died. The tradecraft he had taught at the farm had been revised and updated by the institutional knowledge built on the wreckage of cases like his. He walked out into a world that had moved on, into a country that had largely forgotten his name, and into a family relationship with his children that decades of absence, betrayal, and court proceedings had made into something that bore little resemblance to the household in Burke, Virginia, where Nathan had been 14 and Starr had been 7, and the dinner was on the table every night. The question the Nicholson case poses most insistently is not the legal one. That was settled by guilty pleas, by sentencing hearings, by the accumulated weight of documentary evidence gathered across 2 separate investigations spanning more than a decade. The question it poses is about the transmission of harm. How the choices of one person, made within a professional context that no one else in his family shared or understood or had any meaningful say in, moved outward through a family structure and altered the lives of people who had not made those choices and could not escape their consequences. Nathan Nicholson's involvement in his father's second act of espionage was voluntary in the legal sense that matters for prosecution. He made choices, and a federal judge held him accountable for them, however leniently. But those choices were made in the context of a relationship with a father who had been an imprisoned spy since Nathan was 14, the most formative male presence in his life, precisely because of the absence and the guilt and the idolization that absence had generated, and who had, according to federal prosecutors, deployed the full emotional weight and the professional training of that relationship to recruit his own son into criminal activity. The prosecutors said it directly in their sentencing memo. Harold Nicholson had significant emotional power over his son and used his skills to groom and manipulate him. To acknowledge that is not to dissolve Nathan's agency or to eliminate his legal responsibility. It is to observe that human choices are made within relational contexts that shape what seems possible, what seems obligatory, and what feels like loyalty. Harold Nicholson was a man of genuine professional gifts. His colleagues described him as formidable. The joint CIA-FBI team that investigated him treated the case with the seriousness they would give to another Ames. His career record, before the betrayal, was one of real achievement in genuinely difficult circumstances. None of that makes what he did more forgivable, but it does make it more instructive, because the lesson of his case is not that a bad actor infiltrated the CIA from outside. The lesson is that the institution produced him, trusted him, promoted him, and placed him in a position where his betrayal could cause maximum damage, and that the systems designed to catch him took years to do so, and that by the time they did, the harm was done, and the children had already lost their father to a prison cell. The alias Neville R. Strachey dropped into a mailbox on an ordinary street in Northern Virginia. The PlayStation case with $100 bills inside. The password phrase used at a TGI Fridays in Cyprus. The failed polygraph in a climate-controlled room where Nicholson tried to control his breathing and could not control it well enough. These are the actual textures of the case. Not a thriller's abstractions, but the mundane and specific mechanics of a betrayal conducted by a real person in real places, with real consequences for real people who are still living with them. Harold James Nicholson was 46 years old when FBI agents put handcuffs on his wrists at Dulles Airport one day before his birthday. He was 73 when he walked out of federal custody nearly 3 decades later. In between, he lost his freedom, his career, his standing, the ordinary years of his children's lives, and whatever image he had maintained of himself as a man whose choices were justified by what they would provide for the people he loved. What they provided, in the end, was a federal probation sentence for his oldest son, a lifetime of explained surnames for his other children, and the memory of a father who was most present in their lives precisely when he was absent, and who, when given the chance to stop, looked at his son and decided to keep going.